Quickstep's train was looking good until it wasn't. Problems for Mark Cavendish in the opening stage of Tour of Oman. Well, actually, he looked pretty good, but we'll get to that in a second. Opening stage of this week-long stage race was a 139-kilometer sprint stage, but the last K was a 3% uphill drag, so you didn't want to get dropped off at 200 meters. That would be too early. There'd be over 12 seconds plus in the wind, and we do have a reduced start list here at the Tour of Oman. We do have Ryan Gibbons with UAE Team Emirates, their sprinter here, Fernando Gaviria, and then Rui Costa, who we saw in Saudi Tour the other day. Will probably be going for GC as their GC candidate. Bike Exchange have a young but talented sprint train with some of the ex-track boys for Caden Groves. There's Novo Nordisk, there's an Omani national team, and also Quickstep, with pre-race favourite for the general classification being Fausto Masnada. He came third in Tour de Romandie last year, but Intermarché have got Rain Taramai and Jan Hirt, who in these sort of Middle Eastern races can be pretty good. Arkea also here hunting points. I think Eli Jesbe will be their GC leader. He came fifth in this race back in 2019. It's taken a bit of a hiatus, but this race in the past has had some outstanding start lists and racing and stages, particularly the Green Mountain stage, which we have that stage finish. It's like 6Ks, 10% later on in the week. But as you can tell from the images, Breakaway went, Peloton was pretty chilled. Euskaltel got Peo Goikecha, sorry, it's a Basque name, obviously from Euskaltel, one of the most difficult ones on the circuit to pronounce. They got him in the breakaway, and he would also take the King of the Mountains points and that jersey. There was a pretty nasty climb, actually, of about 1K, 9.6% in the middle of this stage, which you can see here. And there's some big opportunities this week for some GC contenders or young GC-focused riders to show themselves and prove themselves, even like Henry Van Danibiel, for example, who came like second or third behind Pidcock maybe in the Baby Giro a couple of years ago. He's here on DSM. Anton Sharmig, one of the only riders actually who did Saudi Tour apart from Costa, is here. Well, Costa's not a young GC prospect, but look out for two guys on Bardiani. Luca Colnaghi and Filippo Zanna. They're actually really good, talented young guys. I'm expecting them to make the jump up to World Tour either in the next year or the next couple of years, subject to their contracts. I think they can try and do something in this race. As well as I'll be looking at Cofidis. They got Hugo Tomir here. I think he came 4th or 5th in L'Avenir last year, but was quite a few minutes back on Johannesson and Rodriguez and co. Anyway, they got over that climb. Cavendish and Gaviria were in that group. Three big sprinters here with Groves, Cavendish, and Gaviria. And so it was just a matter of controlling the rest of the descent and then the flat run into the finish when they'd bring back Peo, which they did pretty easily, to be honest. And so after this race, there's also UAE Tour in a couple of weeks. That's the only World Tour race in the Middle East. But as you can see, highway drag into town and Peo was brought back. And the problem for Quickstep was that there's very small teams here because a lot of problems with COVID at the moment, not just in the pro peloton generally speaking, but everywhere in the world obviously. But the peloton's not immune from that. So you see already Quickstep having trouble controlling. There's Kayser, I think, who lost the wheel of that Quickstep rider, and they've got Stan van Tricht and Steels, and they're trying to chase back. This is before really they're setting up their train, sprinting, trying to catch back up to DSM, who'd sensed a bit of weakness and had paced and actually set up an attack for Søren Kragh Andersen, which was kind of surprising. And they don't really have a sprinter here. And Quickstep looked good here, right? They looked good there. 5 riders all lined up ahead of UAE. Suddenly they get close into the last kilometre, they all go missing, and Cavendish is left without a last man in the last 500 metres, whilst Gaviria is getting a magic lead out from the man who was supposed to be retired, Maximiliano Richese. He did a 6-month extension for UAE. He's in front of Gaviria, and listen, this ain't Tour de France level sprint stage with 5 trains. I know that, but 300 meters to go, uphill drag. He does a really nice job for Fernando Gaviria here, who hadn't won since Polonia last year and wasn't great at Saudi. Gaviria is checking, do I have time? He's got Groves on his wheel, Cavendish another wheel behind him, and this is why Why do lead-out men go to the left and leave a one-man width to the barriers, and why do riders sprint to the barriers? It's for exactly this reason, and this is why Cavendish position got punished, because you either have to follow Gaviria's draft and you can't open up to the left of him if you follow him past Richeze, or if you're in Cavendish position, you have to duck out to the left. And listen, February, it's a little bit early for me to get the Christoph Pythagoras theorem triangle out to show how much further it is that Cavendish has to go, but he has to go to the left, not get an ideal draft. You see, he didn't really want to, he made that decision late, and Cavendish had good legs here, pretty good legs. Gaviria was obviously in a much better position, but Cavendish comes out of the draft and is able to beat Groves to the line. But that magic lead out from Richeze was, it was really good, and Gaviria was good enough, at least here, to finish that off. So I'm not sure if Quickstep will change it up this week, or if there's too much they can do. Cav a little bit annoyed at the finish there. He probably knows he had pretty good legs in this finish. But UAE happy. You'll remember in the Saudi Tour highlight videos last week that I said that their lead out was Shambles 1 and Shambles 2, and it was pretty bad. But at least here with Richeze, they got it right, and he wins the opening stage of Oman, taking the leader's jersey for the next stage. Cavendish coming second, Groves third, then Capio, Pinot, Richeze, Valscheid, Hugo Page, Perron, and Michael Rime rounding out the top 10. The next stage should be another sprint, subject, always need to put that caveat in there, subject to wind. We saw how much that could affect the GC in Saudi last week. It could affect GC in Provence tomorrow, and maybe here in Tour of Oman it might also play a role. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Like it down below if you did, and make sure to check out my new website, lanternrouge.com.au, if you want recaps of every stage straight after the stage. Ciao.